This is a 2012 Jaguar XKR-S, and it's crazy. It's bright blue, as you can see, and the performance backs up the styling. This car has 550 horsepower, which made it the most powerful Jaguar ever made when it came out back in 2012. And today, I'm going to review it. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website with cool cars from the modern era. And we've had some great sales recently, including this beautiful C7 Corvette ZR1, which sold for $158,000, this Audi RS4 convertible, which sold for just over $29,000, and this fantastic Volkswagen Passat W8 manual transmission wagon, which sold for $22,000. If you're looking to sell your cool car from the modern era, Cars and Bids is the place to do it. You'll find the most interest and the most money for your cool car. And if you're looking to buy a cool car, Cars and Bids has amazing selection with daily auctions. Check it out at carsandbids.com. I've borrowed this XKR-S from Elite Finish, which is the best shop in San Diego for all of your car's cosmetic needs. They do detailing, paint protection, ceramic coating, protective film. Elite Finish has worked on pretty much all of my cars, and they have a great reputation. So if you're in the San Diego area or Southern California and you want your car looking its best, check out Elite Finish. You can follow Elite Finish on Instagram by clicking the link in the description below. So let's talk XKR-S. This car is bright blue, obviously. Jaguar calls it French racing blue, but amazingly, the color is not the most shouty thing about this car. That honor goes to the engine. This has a supercharged V8 with 550 horsepower and about 500 pound-feet of torque. Like I said, it was the most powerful Jaguar ever made back when it came out, including the XJ220 supercar. And this will do almost 190 miles an hour. That's a big deal for Jaguar, and it was an even bigger deal back in 2012 when this car came out, when Jaguar was even more luxury and less performance than they are today. This was one of the cars Jaguar was hoping would help change that reputation and make them seem more youthful and energetic, transforming the XK luxury coupe into a muscle car. Today we're going to see how they did. First, I'm going to take you on a tour of the XKR-S and show you all of its interesting quirks and features. Then I'll get it out on the road and see how it drives, and then I'll give it a DOUGSCORE. All right, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the XKR-S by discussing the color. Now, this car was offered in black, silver, white, red, green, or this French racing blue, which pops. You can just see it is a really impressive color, one of my very favorite colors of any car from this period. In fact, several people have reached out to me over the years with XKR-S's, seeing if I wanted to review them, and I always said no until I could find a blue one, because this is the color for this car. Now, interestingly, this color wasn't an option. It was just one of the standard colors you could choose on the XKR-S. And in fact, there really were no options on this car. You can see the window sticker here, no real options at all. A far cry from today's vehicles, all of which have $30,000 or $40,000 or $50,000 in individual personalization. No. This car came one way. It cost $133 grand, and that was it. You just chose the color. And if you were smart, you chose this one. And on a similar subject, let's talk about this car's market position, because I always thought it was kind of funny. The base version of this car came out, the Jaguar XK, but Jaguar wanted something sportier to appeal to younger people, so they came out with the XKR. But Jaguar wanted something sportier to appeal to younger people, so they came out with the XKR-S, this car. But then Jaguar decided they wanted something sportier to appeal to younger people, so they came out with the XKR-S GT, which had the same power as this car, but a few more like track-focused features. So there were like several different performance versions you could get if you were one of those younger people Jaguar was trying to court. They really wanted to prove that they could make performance cars, and so they made various different levels of performance cars for this. And the easiest way for Jaguar to prove that they were serious about a performance car was this: power. Like I said, 550 horsepower made this the most powerful Jaguar ever made when it came out, more than the XJ220 supercar, which was one of the fastest cars on the planet in the 1990s. This had more power. 0 to 60 was in the low 4-second range for this car, and Jaguar knew that power alone wouldn't suffice. They also had to give it an exhaust note to match, and so they did. One other thing I like under here, in addition to the engine itself, it says supercharged on both sides. You have a supercharged badge on the driver's side and a supercharged badge on the passenger side, so whichever way you're looking at the engine, you know that it's supercharged. And close the hood and you will see supercharged badges on both sides again. Supercharged on the driver's side, supercharged on the passenger side. They really wanted to make sure that you knew this is supercharged. Turbocharged? No. Supercharged, supercharged, supercharged. But Jaguar made other changes to the XKR-S beyond more power, like for instance a more aggressive front end design, as you can see here, a bold, muscular look compared to the relatively simple, beautiful look of the standard model. For instance, you had these little slots on the side of the front bumper for aerodynamics, which are a rare addition for Jaguar models. You also had a larger lower grille for better airflow, and this carbon fiber front splitter that made it feel like a real performance car. And in back you had quad exhausts and a carbon fiber rear diffuser, again enhancing the performance car credibility, though probably the biggest and most noticeable exterior upgrade was this massive rear spoiler going across the entire back of the car. A hugely noticeable upgrade with the ends painted in blue to match the body. This was a huge change for Jaguar, since Jags usually had such subtle traditional styling and design cues. I also loved the front nostrils on this car on the hood, which aren't that noticeable when you look at them from above, though they become a lot more obvious as you back up and see the car from the front. These big openings that remind everyone this car meant serious performance. But while the XKR-S certainly had some great performance car credibility with its power and its styling, the interior was weird, very much full of quirks and some rather interesting mistakes, frankly. This was Jaguar's first ever kind of modern car interior. Previous Jaguar models lagged way behind their rivals, and this was intended to bring it into the modern era. And there were some strange decisions made in a lot of places in this interior. For instance, on the door panel, you can see this carbon fiber trim, except it isn't carbon fiber, it's actually fabric. This is fabric designed to look like carbon fiber. I've never seen carbon fiber fabric before. You also have this on the seats. You can see the seat centers have this like carbon fiber look leather. It is so strange. And the weirdness here is compounded by the fact that there is no other carbon fiber anywhere else in this interior. So they gave you carbon fiber fabric, vinyl leather, but they didn't give you any actual carbon fiber, which is strange. Here's another strange one with this interior. Back to the door panel. This is the door handle. Looks pretty normal, except when you start driving, the car automatically locks the doors. A lot of cars do that, but this one locks the doors by pushing in the door handle, and that it's locked, which sounds like an interesting idea, except that this car has no button you can press to lock or unlock the doors. Meaning, if the doors are locked and you want to unlock them, you have to pull the door handle. Now, if you pull it just a little bit, it will unlock the doors, but a lot of times you end up pulling it too much and opening the door. So the only way to unlock the passenger door, if you're sitting in the driver's seat, is to pull the door handle and risk opening your door by accident. Just poorly thought through, frankly. Next up, here's a weird one. In the center console around the cup holders, you can see this felt trim. You just have this piece of felt going around the cup holders, which just looks completely out of place in this interior. Now, the reason it's there is because the armrest can be moved forward, and when it's forward, then it's sitting on the felt and it won't damage your interior trim, which makes sense, except when the armrest is pushed back, you then have this ugly exposed felt that looks like it came from an elementary school project sitting in your beautiful $130,000 car's interior, this completely out of place center console felt. A very weird decision. And next up, another mistake in this interior, brought to you by the fact that Jaguar hadn't really made a modern luxury car interior before, like I said, is the heated seat controls. They are not buttons. Instead, they're integrated into the infotainment screen, which doesn't sound like such a bad idea, except when you're in your car and you want to listen to the radio and turn on the heated seats, you're listening to the radio and you just press a button to turn on the heated seats. In this car, if you're on the radio screen and you want to turn on the heated seats, you first have to press home, and only then can you access the heated seat controls. So instead of just pressing a simple button, you have to go into menus. And it's even worse if you want to change the position of the air for the climate control. Most of the climate controls do have hard buttons you can see here on the center control stack, which is nice. But the positioning of the air requires more work. You're on the radio again, you want to change where the air is flowing out. You first have to press home, and then you have to press climate, and only then can you actually access the airflow. In every other car, this is just like a little dial or a button you press to direct the air, but in this thing, it is a multi-step process using different menus in the infotainment screen. Again, just bad design. And the really incredible thing about this is the auto lamp delay has its own switch. So this is the feature when you're pulling into your driveway at home, you get out of the car, how long you want the headlights to stay on for before they turn off. You can adjust that using this switch on the turn signal stalk, and you can change it to different settings. That's a feature you will change maybe once every 5 years, and it has its own switch, but turning on your heated seats requires you to go into different menus in the infotainment system. Just not really thought out all that well. And next up, another rather strange decision in here. Moving into the gauge cluster, this is the odometer. This little teal script in small print, doesn't say miles, doesn't say anything, it's just like a number. That's your odometer, which seems like a strange place to display such important information. Weirder still, it's only available if you're on the gauge cluster screen for your trip odometer A. If you go to any other display information, the odometer goes away. So like your range miles, your fuel economy, all that stuff, your odometer is no longer displayed. And if you want to see it, you have to go back to trip odometer A. And of course, this interior's most famous potential flaw is the gear selector. You can see right now in the center console, you have the gears displayed, and there's this little circle beneath them, but there's no way to move it. To get the gear selector movable, you first have to start the car, and then it rises up from the center console, and then you can twist it to shift between the gears, which seems like a pretty cool idea, a neat party trick to show your passengers, until the little gear lever rising motor breaks, and then you can't shift into gears, even though the car is working in every other capacity. I'm not sure if they actually really had problems with this, but it just seems like an extra complication just to have a cool gimmick in a car. With that said, this interior does have some pretty cool stuff, and one of the biggest benefits in here is the material quality. Everything in here, frankly, is pretty nice. You have a lot of nice materials, a lot of stuff that looks good, feels good, a lot of chrome trim, piano black. It looks like a nice place to spend time in here. I especially like the blue trim on the inside. You can see on the door panel, blue trim and stitching. Same deal on the seats. You have this nice blue trim. The dashboard has blue stitching. There's a lot of blue accents for the inside of the car to match the exterior. And frankly, I think this interior actually looks like a pretty nice place to spend time, even though a lot of the details haven't really been thought out all that well. And one of the best touch points in this interior is the seat controls. You can see them here on the door panel, and they look really nice. This piano black and aluminum trim, it's a fantastic look. I would assume that came from a Bentley, unless you told me it was in this car. One of the things I like most about it is the adjustment to make the seat tighter or wider, depending on your body type. It's this little dial. You just twist it, and then the seat bolsters will get narrower or wider to fit you, and that is a pretty cool way to make that feature work. And next up, since we're talking interior, time to discuss the back seats. Yes, this car has back seats, and they are the most ridiculously tiny, unusable, laughable back seats I've ever seen. I actually have said that about several different vehicles, but I think this might take the cake of worst back seats ever. Even getting into the back seat's a bit of a challenge. You have a little latch you can pull on the front seat, but that only brings it to here. Then you have to press the little seat button and move it forward and just sit here while it slowly goes forward, slowly. They made it so bad because they knew no one was ever actually going to get into the back seats, so a usable mechanism didn't really matter. And so it's just impossible to even get into the back seats. But once the seat is like this, then you can begin to attempt to climb back here, and it is the smallest little thing I've, oh God, I'm stuck in the seatbelt. Well then, I made it into the back seat, no problem. Oh, great automobile. And now the front passenger can comfortably sit right in front of me. But really, look at these back seats. Not only are they incredibly small in terms of legroom, but like the bottom comes up. So you can sit in that tremendously comfortable position where your legs are like raised up above your butt. It looks incredibly uncomfortable, and I promise you it is incredibly uncomfortable, and I have no idea how I am going to get out of here but let's give it a shot. Oh, 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 oh. And finally, we move on to the cargo area, which in contrast to those back seats is actually pretty practical. You have a reasonably roomy cargo area back here with enough space for a lot of stuff. One thing I love in the cargo area, the back seats are so tiny and pathetic that there is a warning label on the underside of the tailgate that warns you not to close the tailgate if there's people in the back, because you will hit their head on the tailgate. The back seats in this car are so pathetically small that before you close the tailgate, you have to say, rear passengers, can you duck? Because otherwise you're gonna get hit in the head. But otherwise the cargo area, like I said, pretty roomy, and I like this nice aluminum trim on the bottom. Looks like an old school luxury car with a luggage rack in back, which is pretty cool. And you lift up the floor in this cargo area and you can see there is another cargo area below that, which gives you even more space and more room for stuff if you want to keep it out of the larger and more public cargo area. Pretty nice space back here, pretty practical, very different from the back seats. And so those are the quirks and features of the Jaguar XKR-S. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the XKR-S. Listen to that. Oh, that exhaust note. Jag is a lot of things, but one of them is they know how to make a V8 sound. Man, wow, a lot of good stuff there. Okay, let's talk about this car. So, you know, this car, when it first came out in 12, I mean, I remember seeing the magazine articles and whatever being like, wow, Jaguar is making that? We kind of take it for granted now because Jaguar now has this whole SVR line and they made the F-Type, and so they're a little bit a lot sportier than they were back then. But this was a big deal at the time, Jaguar producing a car like this. It was just totally unthinkable and unheard of. And I remember seeing the blue one, especially in all these magazines, being like, wow, that's a Jaguar? It seems so crazy. Now this car, like I've shown you in the interior, there's definitely some drawbacks. It is not the best interior in terms of ergonomics, but at least it's a nice interior. So, you know, even though the buttons maybe aren't as logically laid out as they could be, like, it's nice in here. It really does feel luxury car nice. And these cars are a lot cheaper than they once were. I'm not exactly sure what these are going for, but it ain't anywhere near $133,000. I can promise you that. The car really does have a lot of great things going for it. It's fast. It really, really feels fast. And actually, it's a little bit disappointing because the car is faster than the car wants to be. The engine is great. The transmission is what slows it down. It uses this old school torque converter automatic like you'd expect from a car from this era, which is fine in this era, but you drive it now and it's clearly the weak link in the car, at least in terms of, you know, the way that it feels when it's accelerating. You're going hard, you're feeling it, you're hearing it, and then you kind of have to take a break basically to make an upshift. Handling is also surprisingly good for this car, surprisingly composed. You know, the XKR-S got like sportier suspension, bigger brakes, all the stuff you'd expect from a performance car in addition to the extra power. But you can feel it pretty well. It handles reasonably well. The steering feel is not that great. The steering precision is really not there. Jaguar that wasn't their thing. But they did a pretty good job tuning the body so that body roll is minimized and that handling in corners is pretty good. It feels sharp, it feels planted, it feels like it knows what it's doing going through corners, stays stable, stays nice. Even though the steering feel itself is a little lighter than you'd want from a car like this. But really though, this was a Jaguar muscle car. I mean, a Jaguar muscle car. It was just like, let's throw a massive engine and a giant wing on this car that we already make and see what happens. And the XK always had this reputation of being like kind of an old person's car. You threw golf bags in it. You know, it was like a relaxed cruiser. But doing this really turned it into a more serious car, and it showed Jaguar's intentions, which they later followed up by making like sporty SUVs in the F-Type. I will say the color of this car is quite appealing to people. People kept coming up to me, oh my God, this blue, what is this color? Oh. I'm sure the blue on sell for a little bit more now. It was absolutely the color to get. Now the XKR-S GT also existed, like I mentioned. It was this same horsepower, but it had like some more handling and track focus stuff, but it didn't have any extra power than this car. So this or the GT, it was kind of the best of breed for these. But they were both a lot sharper and stronger than the regular XKR, if that's what you wanted. And so that's the Jaguar XKR-S. This is an impressive car with bold styling and a muscular engine, almost like a Hellcat or a Shelby Mustang from Jaguar. And almost 10 years after this car came out, it's still pretty cool. And now it's time to give the XKR-S a DOUGSCORE. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the XKR-S is a handsome car, beautiful, simple lines, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Acceleration to 0 to 60 in 4.2 seconds, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Handling is good, not quite on true sports car level, but not so bad, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Fun factor is also good, again, not quite like a 911 or a Ferrari California, but still a hoot given the big V8 and the exhaust note and rear-wheel drive, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Finally, cool factor, and this car is cool, especially in this color, though most people will just think it's a bright blue Jaguar, and it gets a 6 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 32 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. It has some good stuff, but it's behind by modern standards, and it gets a 4 out of 10. Comfort is okay, not great, but also not too rough, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Quality is good. The interior materials are nice, and I'd give it a pretty high score if it weren't for Jaguar reliability. It gets a 6 out of 10. Practicality is normal for a car like this, a sporty coupe with a tiny back seat, and it gets a 3 out of 10. Value is okay. These sell for more than you'd think, $40,000, $50,000 or more. They're certainly special, and while I don't think they provide that level of experience, they are very rare and distinctive and unlikely to go down in value. It gets a 6 out of 10 for a total daily score of 24 out of 50. Added up, and the DOUGSCORE is 56 out of 100, which places the XKR-S here against a few rivals. It finishes last, but that makes sense in this group, as these competitors were all a lot more expensive back then, except for the C63 and the M3. Overall, the XKR-S is a special, rare car, and it certainly has some appeal, especially if you want to buck the usual trend of Porsche, BMW, and Mercedes.